when I saw him on screen as a little boy, he was in just about every television show there was. If that, I mean, people will ask me now, well, did he ever do a Columbo? I'm like, probably, and then I look and I go, yeah, and then I watch it, and he did really every show on television, every drama. He showed up, and he was always you know, he was always very specific. He just didn't seem like anybody else. And I mean, there was that tinge of a British accent that was left over from his childhood. But there was also a spirit of sort of a joie de vivre.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. My guest today is Samuel Garza Bernstein. He's author of Roddy McDowall, An Actor's Life. Roddy McDowall made his film debut in a British quota quickie in 1938, his final screen appearance in A Bug's Life 60 years later. Between these two credits, he compiled one of the most breathtaking resumes in the history of Hollywood: 121 films, 877 television appearances, 35 stage plays, a Tony Award, an Emmy Award, 4 volumes of celebrity photography, a pioneering role in the film preservation movement, and a circle of lifelong friends, including Lauren Bacall, Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Sybil Burton, Christopher, just about every other legend of the 20th century entertainment world. If you knew Roddy McDowall, you had 1 degree of connection to everyone. That was before 6 degrees of separation from you know who. In his new book, Stonewall Book Award-winning author and screenwriter Samuel Garza Bernstein delivers the first comprehensive biography of one of the most beloved and underestimated figures in the arts. Roddy McDowall, An Actor's Life, is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And for everything about Samuel, go to SamuelGarzaBernstein.com and follow him on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Vimeo. And Samuel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I was delighted that you decided to. The last time I had you on, we were talking about Cesar Romero. Roddy McDowall has been part of the American culture for so long, and yet all of a sudden, because he's no longer with us and not appearing in movies and television, etc., people tend to forget about him. But just by my introduction and your book, there's so much to his life and so much just on a production level, let alone personal life or anything else, friendships, anything else. How did you decide to take on this? This is a major project. So how did you decide to take on this project about Roddy
Well,
McDowall?
you know, like anything, there's a collaborative aspect to it. It was actually my agent who had the idea, and then the publisher, Kensington, my editor there had wanted to do something about Roddy for quite a while, and was sort of looking for the right writer, the right take to come along, and I guess whatever it was that I pitched, he bit. Um, Now, for me, I kind of grew up wanting to be Roddy McDowall. I mean, I like when I saw him on screen as a little boy, he was in just about every television show there was. If that, I mean, people will ask me now, well, did he ever do a Columbo? I'm like, probably, and then I look and I go, yeah, and then I watch it, and he did really every show on television, every drama. He showed up, and he was always, you know, he was always very specific. He just didn't seem like anybody else. And I mean, there was that tinge of a British accent that was left over from his childhood. But there was also a spirit of sort of a joie de vivre. And I just really connected to it. I think as a young kid, um, I probably instinctively kind of sensed that he was gay. and I was gay, and kind of that kind of thing of looking for role models. I mean, I don't think I consciously understood that that was what I was doing, but I was looking for who's like me. And he seemed sort of at least like the me that I would like to grow up into. And I mean, when you're thinking of the 70s and early 80s, if you're looking for that kind of prototype gay character, well, I didn't really want to grow up and be Charles Nelson Riley, bless him. I mean, I knew him. I mean, I had met him and he was lovely, but I mean, I thought of myself as a little bit more sort of going on with swagger
Oh,
than
you mean like Paul Lynde?
yeah, than that. And I think Roddy kind of fit the bill. I also discovered when I started looking into it that he had these extensive archives at Boston University. He had them sealed for 25 years after his death, so it just kind of dovetailed almost magically. They were unsealed literally 6 months before I started talking about writing about him.
That is correct.
So
Yeah.
they were recently available, and so was I.
Was there anybody that I always hate to ask this question, but when I've talked to authors who write biographies of people who have been deceased for a while and time has gone by, that it's hard to find people that knew him because again, we're talking about a major person in the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, but were there people you were able to interview, talk with that are still around that knew Roddy?
So many people. First of all, he was unusually active to the very end. So, he was working with people right till the end. But he also, because of his sort of famous gatherings of people in Hollywood, I mean, he would have people over all the time and he would create different mixes of people. He liked that. So it was not, I mean, Ileana Douglas told me that she actually got a message from her agent that, Roddy McDowall would like to meet you. Would you like to meet Roddy McDowall? And she's like,
Of course.
yes, I would like to meet Roddy McDowall. And so he was in, and that was, when she was really just starting out in Hollywood. And her grandfather was Melvin Douglas, and so she had her ties to old Hollywood. And they became friends, and suddenly she's sitting there with Elizabeth Taylor and Gregory Peck, and George. She found her husband through Roddy McDowall. Her husband was George Axelrod's son, Jonathan Axelrod, and she met that family through her ties to Roddy. And
It almost sounds like a Hollywood version of Algonquin Roundtable.
um, I think with a little bit less desperation to be quoted, I think people there was a sense about Roddy's gatherings that this was not a place to compete. This was a place where everybody could shine.
Mhm.
And really it was important to him that people felt like they were appreciated and that they could be their best selves. Even the lighting helped. There was not an overhead light in evidence. And just a million little soft lights everywhere. And I think women of a certain age often talk about how they loved going there because they felt like the minute they were there that they had key lighting and looked, 20 years younger.
That's funny. What was the most surprising thing you found out in your research, both either in Boston Library or the Boston University Library or the people that you talked to? What was the most surprising thing you found out about Roddy McDowall? Or maybe
Well,
there's more
the
than one thing.
there were a lot of things, but the happiest surprise was the complete normalization of his relationships. Back in the late 50s, his team, his agent, his publicist, his the people at the studio, the people at networks, everyone knew who his partners were and referred to them by name and discussed them as his partner. You know, oh, give my love to John. I got the funniest card from Paul last week. Do tell him how much it made me laugh. Um, when you're talking about gay people of a certain age, there are varying degrees of normalcy surrounding their romantic life. And I'm not talking about the gossip of, who's sleeping with who. I'm talking about your regular life. You're traveling to Rome to work on Cleopatra. You have your partner with you. All of the arrangements have to be made for the two of you to fly, to stay in hotels, to deal with things. And when when you can be open about that, then you're being open about your life. And I think it's a tremendously important thing, really.
When you look at that in contrast to, for example, Rock Hudson, because that's in roughly the same era, there is that dichotomy. So that's an interesting point. I guess the thing that always amazed me about Roddy, and I have still not made a decision about it, is when I always enjoyed watching him, was I watching an actor in a role and it was that person he was playing, or was I watching Roddy performing in that movie or television show? So in other words, was the force of his personality, whatever that was that what I'm seeing, or am I seeing an actual role, an actor in a role?
Well, I think it depends on the project. When
But
you're talking about
Samuel,
something.
the reason I'm saying that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the reason I'm saying that is that he had such a distinctive look and sound that you knew who he was, unless he was under 10 pounds of makeup. And even then, with the voice, you would know who it was. But I guess that's what I'm trying to, in my own mind, work out whether I was just intrigued by Roddy McDowall, the actor personality, who he was. He was so strong versus the role he was in.
Well, I think like any performer, Roddy was able to exist in the moment and be present. And really, that's when you're talking about acting, that's really the trick. Is Are you here right now, this moment, responding organically to what's going on around you? And that he was able to do that and bring the force of his own personality when it made sense, I think is what every actor does. But in his hundreds of performances, he really disappears very often into all kinds of characters that are completely different from who he was in his regular life. I mean, obviously, Planet of the Apes, is a kind of special case in that way. But from the start, when he was a child, what was extraordinary about his ability was that he was able to be emotionally truthful and present in the moment and respond. Now, that sounds very simple, but it's not. And especially when you look at children performing, the more sort of performy, let me entertain you they get, the more you want to kill yourself, and he had none of that. Um, and really, when we think about his contributions as a performer, I think it's really important to remember just how big of a star he was as a child, how important he was to the war effort. Um, he was pushing, well, not he wasn't pushing it, but the studio and the government was pushing an image of him in all of those movies that he made in 1941 and 1942 as the face of British war relief. He was what we were fighting for. he was that plucky kid that deserved and needed American support. And he really became um, a symbol that was larger than just his child performances, and he mattered. You know, you saw those giant eyes of his, you know, on screen, and you know, and the camera goes in, and he could share that vulnerability, but also that strength. And in movies like How Green Was My Valley and Lassie Come Home and My Friend Flicka and all of that, it was such an important piece of the American war effort that I don't think it can be overstated.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't know about that background of Roddy McDowall. They think of him from a particular movie. The average person, I think, would think of him as from a particular movie or movies, but not the whole history as you give in the book. Again, it's called Roddy McDowall, An Actor's Life, and it is a full life. I mentioned in my opening about his involvement with the film preservation movement as well. Why did that become important to him?
Even as a little boy, he was fascinated by history. He wrote a fan letter to Pola Negri, who most of your viewers are not going to know who that was, but for a minute, she was one of the biggest stars who rivaled Greta Garbo in silent film, and was also either fictionally or truthfully, I'm not sure, tied to Rudolph Valentino.
Mhm.
And when he died, she was at the funeral and fainting, and you know, and there was always for years afterwards. She was, you know, at the anniversary of his death, she was seen at the cemetery, and you know, there was a lot made of that. Well, um, Roddy reached out to her, wrote her a letter, and asked for her picture and autograph. And somehow she figured out where he lived and showed up at the door.
Oh,
And they carried on a correspondence really for the rest of her life. And he was tied to history in an almost preternatural way, I think. It all mattered to him. And his involvement, he was very involved with the country home for the Motion Picture and Television Fund. And in fact, there's a rose garden dedicated to him there with the statue of him as Caesar, the second character that he played in the Planet of the Apes movies. And It just mattered to him, the history of cinema, the history of entertainment, and throughout his career, he cultivated relationships with people. One of his best friends was Noel Coward, and that really predated him. You know, Noel Coward was the toast of British theater before Roddy was born. And yet, you know, when his celebrity gave him an opportunity to meet some of these, you know, the older generation of performers and writers and directors, he really seized on that and cultivated those friendships. I think he thought that it mattered just tremendously that people remember these people and remember what it is they achieved. And I think, you know, I was only able to watch some of his early films that he made when he was a little boy at the British Film Institute in London. And as I was sitting there in my little edit room with a flatbed editing, you know, apparatus where you actually are loading the film and, you know, and going back and forth, I thought to myself that he would have had gotten a real kick out of that. And I thought, you know, I'm looking at things that probably no one has looked at in, you know, 80 years, 90 years. The movies that are, you know, that are preserved, but are not really available anywhere. And uh, and you think about all of those people coming together, all, those years ago, 90 years ago, to make this movie, and for somebody to think about it, to remember, to write about it, to watch their work all these years later. It, I mean, I think to me it's important on almost a spiritual level.
Do you think that he would have been what is the word? Delighted, I think would probably be the best one I would come up with. But do you think he'd be delighted that there's interest in him, that you're writing a book, that you've written the book about him? Again, it's Roddy McDowall, an actor's life, that it's almost the bookend to his wanting to preserve history, him getting in touch with various actors from a previous generation.
I hope so. I mean, I think that he has archives. You don't, put everything in an archive if you don't imagine somebody may be looking at it one day
That's a good
and
point.
writing about it.
Yeah, that's a good point,
It's
right?
if you really don't want a book about you, then
Right.
burn everything.
That's a
And
good point.
believe me, he was there. He was one of the executors of Rock Hudson's will. He was there at the end burning things because there were certain personal letters and papers that he felt no one should ever read. And I'm sure that that he wrote things that he didn't save as well.
Yeah, everybody
Everyone
has
has the
their,
right to privacy.
yeah,
Everyone
everybody
has
has
the right.
their privacy and their secrets that they don't necessarily
Yeah,
put out there.
yeah.
Do you think, this is an off the wall question, but it ties into what the work that you do? Do you think that we're going to reach a point with AI that you mentioned about being at the museum in London and going through these films that no one, yes, they're there, but no one has seen them forever? That at some point, just with AI, that everything will be available, even on that level, you're at your computer and you can bring it up, a Roddy McDowall film from who knows when. You don't have to go
Oh,
into a library or a museum to get it.
I know, because it AI isn't magic. It doesn't have the ability to pull something off a physical shelf and run it through a projector. And,
Well,
all of
I
that.
guess you're right, but I was thinking more that the museum or library in every city would make all of these available online, and then you could search it with the help of AI. I guess that's where I was going with that
I
question.
don't think that there's the capacity or the funding to accomplish that. I mean, as it is, it was a tremendously difficult process for me to do the research
I bet.
because with budget cuts, Boston University, the Howard Gottlieb Library there, which is their archival library, is only open 11 hours a week.
That's amazing. You think it over.
So,
Okay, yeah.
you know, I couldn't stay there long enough in Boston to do all the work myself. And I had to hire assistants who took pictures of there's an index, thank God there's an index 200 pages long of all of the materials there, and we pulled about a third of the boxes. We couldn't pull all of them, but there just wasn't the funding or the time available.
Sure.
And I have my gosh, I think about 10,000 JPEGs of things that they determined were of sufficient interest to take a picture of. And then that's how I had to read through all of those archives. Um,
Dedication.
Roddy, Roddy is one of thousands of people with personal archives in the world. And his at least were indexed. A lot of them aren't. And so I think I- you know, we're far away from really having that kind of access to everything. Now, what the archives are going to look like for the future, I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question, actually, now that I think about it. What is Boston University doing with somebody who dies now
Mhm.
and has a digital footprint?
Right.
Is that all available? But see, even that, it's tricky because it all has to be indexed and coded. And AI isn't so great with some of those things. It's useful. I'm not really knocking it, but it isn't magic. It doesn't have consciousness. So it can't understand that it's reading something that has um, like it's not going to understand when you're getting something from Sybil Burton that mentions John and who is that John and what does that have to do with and where does it relate? I know that it relates to John Valva, that it's from 1963, that it's all of these other things, but it I don't know.
Yeah,
I
good
don't
question. When you look at his body of work, did he have a few favorite films
Well,
based on your research?
sure. I love the usual suspects. I love the Poseidon Adventure, where unfortunately,
Well,
spoiler
no, no,
alert.
not you per se. I'm saying, did Roddy have
Oh, did Roddy have?
Roddy have? I know
Yes.
that you have, but I want to know if Roddy
Well,
had favorite films.
he he remained as in awe and as baffled by his own performance in How Green Was My Valley as the rest of us. He's like, I look at that film, I have no idea how John Ford got that performance out of me. And how that exists, because it is. I mean, Maureen O'Hara calls it the finest performance by a child in the history of motion pictures, and I wouldn't argue. I mean, it is that astonishing. You just you, it's almost like it exists in a kind of, I don't know, on a metaphysical realm, that he was channeling some miner's child from the turn of the last century. And so I think that remains one of them. He was very proud of his work in Cleopatra, and it remained a real sore spot to him that the movie was cut so much. The director wanted it to be two films, and there was certainly enough material for it to be two films. And some of his best work was cut in the final edit. And so I think that's definitely one of them. I think he loved Fright Night. He loved that it was kind of you know, like a bouquet to his friend Vincent Price, and his work as an aging actor who has to then come back and fight real vampires. And I think he. Let me think. I want to come up with something that's really kind of like undiscovered. I think he really loved. Oh my God, I can't think of the duck movie. Uh, uh, 1965, uh, Lord Love a Duck.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, just talk about it and have a senior moment. Lord Love a Duck was a great, great, great movie that really was a box office bomb. It did not do well, but it was a satire of American consumerism, of teenagers, of pop culture. And I think it was kind of a wonderful gem.
Before I let you go, we have about a minute left. I cut you off when you're talking about your favorite Roddy McDowall films because I wanted to find out what Roddy's were. But now I'm going to give you the floor and tell us your favorite Roddy McDowall film, if there's just one that's the very top of the pile.
Oh gosh. Well, it's what I was just talking about. So I would say Lord Love a Duck. And he's playing a teenager. I think he's 38. Um, and Tuesday Weld said that it's the best movie she thought she ever made too.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Samuel Garza Bernstein. He's author of Roddy McDowall, An Actor's Life. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And for everything about Samuel, go to samuelgarzabernstein.com. And you can follow him on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Vimeo. And on Facebook, you're under what category?
Embarrassingly, it's called Starring Samuel Garza
Oh, that
Bernstein.
sounds reasonable. Very good. Well, Samuel, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.